Well, let's get to our next guest. Taking a look at President Trump's State of the Union, what it means for small business owners, by someone who's a small business owner himself. Sam Caucci is the CEO of One Huddle, and it's a company that uses game-based training platforms to help employers get their employees ready to tackle the job at hand, I should say. So, Sam, I want to start by a real basic question before we get to your takeaway on the SOTU, State of the Union. Do you support President Trump's policies, basically? Do you see him as a positive force in the last 2 years for small businesses, negative or neutral?
Hey, Kathleen. So I started my company just about 3 years ago under the current administration, and I can say that we have nearly quadrupled the size of our company. We've continued to grow consistently. We've raised capital as a tech startup out of the Bay Area. So I think that a lot of the policies when it comes to reducing regulation or, for us specifically as a small business raising capital has definitely contributed to an environment where investors feel comfortable, customers are buying, and businesses are investing in their business. So, from my perspective, it has been a positive overall environment. I know a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues have started companies today over the last few years, and people feel confident that, and I think that's what, when we get to the State of the Union, we want to make sure we're continuing to create an environment where entrepreneurs, as the core foundation of the U.S. economy, are excited, energetic, and innovative, and continue to be so.
Well, it's interesting, Sam. This is Doug, by the way. You mentioned regulation there, and I'm going to push back a little bit because I would think that for a company that specializes in training employees, compliance is an issue, and that oftentimes suggests that you are necessarily in compliant with a certain rule or regulation that is oftentimes enforced by the government. I mean, don't you benefit a little bit from a regulatory environment?
I think with today's workforce, Doug, you have a lot of challenges with upskilling and preparing workers today as we fend off the robot invasion. It has to do with, different types of skills beyond just training as far as compliance goes. That's kind of my one point. We have a workforce today that there's different types of training and development that's needed more urgently than compliance. But I will say something interesting about there's a lot of talk today about preparing our people for work more effectively. And I find that since I started my business, there have been more regulations that, I think little by little we're moving in the right direction over the last few years. But when I started, there's a lot of regulations that restrict a company's willingness to want to invest in their people.
Sam, could you give us a specific example of that? Give us one you experience it, your customers experience. What's at the top of your list that we can understand?
The mobile phone is a perfect example today. Today, the majority of the U.S. workforce is a frontline worker. These are workers who are on the go, who have a skill gap that needs to be closed quickly. But, believe it or not, in every state across the country, there has been in the past some level of nervousness to invest in or lean into employees using their mobile device in order to skill up or use their mobile device around work in order to better prepare themselves. There's a lot of regulation that HR teams and HR organizations within different organizations have to follow, and these are rules that oftentimes hurt American workers. We do a lot in HR technology. If everybody that's listening has probably spent their time at some point reading a manual or watching a video module. Doug, you mentioned compliance training. It makes more sense today than ever before to let employees engage in skill training on their mobile device outside of working hours, but regulations more often than not restrict that and don't, you can only, apparently today we're making America great again, but we can only do that between 9 and 5. Happens a lot today. So I think that what's happening with the current administration is we're getting away from rules that don't make sense, that hurt American workers. And we definitely need rules to the game, but at the same time, when it comes to the people that drive the U.S. workforce, there's a lot of regulations that hurt small business owners who want to invest in their people and want to continue to grow their company.
So if you were advising the White House Council of Economic Advisors or anybody at the cabinet that may have influence over some kind of policy as it relates to job creation, small business, what would be the top 3 recommendations that you would make?
I would say that we have to lean into technology that is befitting of a 2020 workforce and not a workforce of the 1980s, which means that we have mobile. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have to use technology today to upskill employees faster. Because as a business owner, my biggest challenge is getting employees that are ready to work on day one out of college. And unfortunately, a lot of business owners will tell you today it takes a heck of a lot of time to get an employee ready to work. And I think that's what's driving this move towards more automation more quickly. So I think, and to your point, Doug, I think number 1 is we got to lean into technology. Number 2, we need to invest in the right type of skill training. It's you got to run to where the puck, you got to get to where the puck's going, as Gretzky said. And we spend too much time skilling people up for the job of today, knowing the job of today is changing so much faster than we've ever seen before. So, what are the skills that are coming up in the next few years? We have to we have to prepare for those skills. Number 3, we need more involvement with government, and I think the Trump administration is starting to do this, and business owners to influence the curriculum, the training, and the tools we're using to prepare our workforce. We can't just trust in academia. I would probably tell you that 95% of my employees have some level of college loan debt. They come to work every day a little bit nervous. Okay.
Sam, before we wrap this up, because we're getting close to the end, what do we need from a Democratic candidate? Who's going to convince you that they're the better bet than President Trump?
I think that the Democratic candidate that will pique my interest is the one who, the one thing that I haven't heard a lot from the Trump administration has to do with how can we strike balance? How can we continue to grow the U.S. economy? How can we continue to let companies invest in their people? But, when I see situations where I see like the Amazons of the world getting massive tax breaks to move their business into towns, and I'm a small, 35 employee company, and I get no tax breaks, and 30% of my payroll goes to taxes.